Now let us also understand what a low voltage architecture, which is like two-wheeler and three-wheeler, is focused on. Let us have a few slides on how those architecture looks like and what does it do in low voltage two-wheeler architecture. So here, as we know, like low voltage architecture is mostly it is centralized architecture. It is quite simple. It just has one single board and everything is there in the single board. All the voltage monitoring, all the temperature monitoring, everything is there in a single board. So here is that we have a line diagram where we have a battery module, we have all the temperature sensors and the voltage sensors going in, then we have a positive line and the battery negative line going to the BMS. So one interesting part is the positive line goes to the positive connector through the BMS, through the fuse, so that if there is any extra or high current coming through the module, the fuse protects the connectors and the outer devices without being burnt. And also we have PDU on this, where the negative goes to the BMS and from the load it goes to the connector. So that is how the line diagram for the low voltage two-wheeler architecture looks like. And if you see why this is more centralized is, if you see the dimensions of this battery pack, it is hardly a part of a module. Even the module is bigger than the battery pack over here. So that is the reason, since the dimensions, everything are so smaller, we can accommodate everything in this space. Even though it is some 10-15 mm higher, the voltage sensors won't get affected because of this dimension. It is very small. So that is the main reason why low voltage is sufficient with a centralized architecture, and the same board can have all the voltages, temperature sensors and all. And some optional features that it can also hold is it can have a telematics feature like this one, which could show the GPS location, its positioning, etc. It can have a Bluetooth connectivity as well. These are all optional features, and then it also can have SOC indicator device on the same battery pack as well. So this is what a low voltage two-wheeler battery pack would architecture would look like. So this is a case study where we have low voltage pack harness. So for the same pack which we have seen earlier, now this is the same pack which is 51.1 volts and 35Ah pack, which uses 3.6 volts and 5Ah2170 cells. So these are cylindrical cells, and now if we see, we have total 14 number of cells in series and we have 7 number of cells in parallel, which gives us a resultant voltage of 51.5 volts or 0.1 volts and 35Ah, and the module configuration to be 14S and 7. So this is the module configuration. At the same time, if you see the harness, the BMS used is basically a centralized BMS, and the number of voltage sensors, as we know, it's the same as high voltage, is equal to the number of cells in series. And the number of hotspots are completely different, which is widely dependent on the number of the kind of simulation which we do and kind of hotspots which we obtain on the module. And the fuses are always placed on the positive power line of the battery pack. Now let us understand how the low voltage three-wheeler battery pack architecture looks like. So this is a little bit different than what we have in the two-wheeler. So usually in three-wheelers and two-wheelers have low voltage and also the capacities are low. Whereas in three-wheelers, even though the voltage are like 48 volts, 60 volts, the capacity of these packs are quite high. Packs which are lower than 100Ah, and there are also packs which are greater than 150Ah. And this is mainly because of the reason that three-wheelers are actually used by people for commuting, and when that happens, people always tend to be interested when there is a higher mileage obtained through three-wheelers. So that is the reason these battery packs are of higher capacity, and when higher capacity come into picture, there is again the need of precharge and etc. coming to picture, but the number of cells in series for making a 48 volt is still the same. So the architecture for any of the pack, two-wheeler or three-wheeler, when it is less than 100Ah, can be the same for both, for two-wheelers and three-wheelers. That's what you can see over here. You have cells, but in three-wheelers mostly we use prismatic cells. So you have cells, you have positive and negative sides of the module. All the connectors, all the voltage sensors are going to the BMS, and the positive line has the fuse, and from there it is going to the power connector. So this is how a low voltage three-wheeler battery pack of 50.4 volts and 100Ah capacity looks like. It is much more similar to that of a two-wheeler architecture. But the interesting part over here is, if we see the spacing over here, this is the place where you can place the battery pack and electronics in the three-wheeler. Whereas in two-wheeler, everything is placed on the top. This is a handle for the two-wheeler and you have all the electronics placed on the top. Whereas for the three-wheeler, all of them are placed in the front of the battery pack. So since this is a bigger pack, it is placed on the front, not on the side or the top of the battery pack, because the top is prevented. We can have handles on the top so that the battery pack can be carried. So this is how the battery pack and the BMSs are located on the three-wheeler battery pack, and this is for the battery pack which is having a lower capacity. Now, when we see a battery pack with higher capacity like 200 Ah and all, that is where the fuse again is replaced with a pre-charge circuit over here. So everything is the same over here. Like you will have not many number of cells. You will have the same number of cells, maybe 16 cells more. Like instead of 16 cells, you will have 32 cells. But the number of cells in series will still be the same. It will still be 16 cells. But it is having a pre-charge circuit over here, which is mainly responsible to avoid all the inrush currents coming in. So again, it has all the optional features which are needed for that could be accommodated. Like it can have GPS, it can have telematics, it can have Bluetooth, it can have SOC indicator, whatnot. But the only change is it has a pre-charge circuit inbuilt in it, so that the high inrush current does not damage all the driveline electronics because of when the ignition is turned on. Now we'll understand what are the functionalities of two-wheeler and three-wheeler BMS. It is similar to what a high voltage battery pack does, but it is done on a single board altogether. So basically it works on a centralized architecture and it does not have any slave BMS. All the measurements and controls decisions are made by the single board, and it also houses the cell balancing, temperature monitoring, safety cutoff operations. BMS also houses the PDU need for connecting the vehicle load. So even the PDU is also integrated into the BMS itself. And we have advanced BMS where we can have CAN based communication through ECU or Bluetooth for live monitoring. And BMS also has some optional features where it could be integrated with SOC indicators and telematics, etc. One extra feature that two-wheeler and three-wheeler BMS or battery pack functionalities are, it can be used in swapping stations. Like some of the swapping OEMs which you might have come across could be a company called Gogoro or Sun Mobility. These are certain companies which are working on swapping models, and when such BMS are used in two-wheelers and three-wheelers, they can also be connected to the cloud, and that could be even more interesting because all the data could also be stored and can be communicated to the cloud, which makes the BMS even more interesting and even more powerful. So now let us touch base again on the basics of cooling plate, where we did not discuss much more in the last session. So this is we can discuss on cooling plates integration and driving factors. So when we say about cooling plates, usually now we might have understood what a cooling plate is. It actually is used for dissipating the heat from the modules because the heat is being generated during charging and discharging. But these cooling plates are designed in different ways, but with all have a common goal, which is like to bring the cells to optimum working temperature, and that is every cooling plate's attribute. So it has to dissipate the heat from the modules, and it's not just a cooling plate, it also acts as a structural member which houses and which holds all the modules on top of it. The modules are not, and the contacts between the cooling plate and the modules are filled up with the thermal interface material in between that. So that is how the cooling plate's main attributes are. When we have cooling plates, there is a lot of fluid being flown across that. So this cooling plate should not just withstand loads, it should also deliver such cooling rates so that the heat is also taken away from that. So when that kind of functionality comes into picture, the material of the cooling plate is also something which is very important. So here we see there are cooling plates where it is made up of aluminum, and we have copper tubing running across, which means the coolant fluid flows to the copper and it is housed in an aluminum structure. So that aluminum, it has a very good thermal conductivity, which is helpful in taking away the heat more, whereas aluminum has a little bit less thermal conductivity compared to copper. But the whole plate cannot be made of copper, as we discussed, because of the density of the copper, which is 3 to 4 times more than what aluminum is. So that's the reason we have aluminum base which has a decent thermal conductivity and much lower energy density, but certain places of it is filled with copper tube so that it has a very good thermal conductivity and it is replaced by that. So this is the advantage of having a sandwiched copper tube, We have different types of copper cold plates and copper tubings. First one is serpentine type, which is of one shape. The next one is also a sandwich serpentine, which is of having a different shape, and then we have parallel flow cooling plates, etc. This is how the cooling plate attributes are divided. So how do we integrate the cooling plate? So here is a exploded view of where the cooling plates are. You can see all the cooling plates over here, and you have all the modules on the top. All these modules go and sit on the cooling plate, and they are fastened over here, and the whole unit then goes and sits inside the base enclosure. And you have all the coolant lines coming in. So these coolant lines are responsible for the flow inlet and outlet everywhere. So that's what I said, like when we need to design a battery pack, it not just to be designed for the modules, it needs to have space for the BMS, it needs to have space for all the electronics, wiring harness, coolant flow lines, coolant hoses, cold plates, gaskets, etc. And one of the most important part is this coolant, cooling tubes or the coolant hoses should be leak proof, because there would be heat transfer fluid going, which could be a combination of water or just water or ethylene glycol or a combination of both. So when water is going through, there should not be any leak, and if such leaks are happening inside, there could be a catastrophe created because of such kind of leaks happening in the cold plate as it enters the busbar high voltage connections, and that's the end of it. So it's very important to make sure that the cooling plates are leak proof. And also we need to have thermal pads between the cooling plates and also the modules, such that the heat generated by the modules is dissipated as much as possible. And also water acts as a heat transfer fluid, and whereas in India it is still fine, but whenever the temperatures touch below 0 degrees temperature, it is very important to see that the water in the cold plate is not frozen. That's the reason a calculated ratio of ethylene glycol is mixed, which is helpful in avoiding the freezing of the coolant inside the cooling plate. That is the main reason why we use a cooling plate. And then we will understand what are the cooling plate driving factors. So now the next slide is the cooling plate driving factors. So here we have considered the same module, which is of 10s2p configuration with 3.2 volts 100 Ah, and we have a cell of IR, which is 0.9 milliohms. So following are the conditions which needs to be considered for designing a proper and very efficient thermal conductive path, which is when the heat is generated in a module, we need to have the same equation, which is Q is equal to I square RT, and we have a continuous C rate of 1C. Then what we need to assess is the thermal pad has to be there between the module and the cooling plate. What is the flow rate of that temperature, or what is the flow rate of that fluid which is being flown? And from that we need to derive rho ARV, and rho AV is something which is dependent on the hose of the cooling pipe. And then we need to consider the convective coefficient of the heat transfer fluid, which is a function of velocity, density of the fluid, temperature, etc. And we also need to consider the cold plate properties of material. The reason why we have driving factors are listed out here, this is a huge study. This is actually a very big study which is used for evaluation of CMD and through CFD simulations and design iteration. This is not something which we can solve overnight. But here are some properties or factors which are given, which are needed, so that which are to be considered to arrive at a very good cooling plate design. And it's one of the most important area where one could excel, and a lot of research could be done in understanding and making a best cooling plate ever. So these are the cooling plate driving factors. And then now we'll look at the abusive usage and the effects on the cell. So let us try to understand what are the abusive usage conditions. By now we might have understood that there could be a lot of abusive usage conditions that from a user point of view could be like high accelerations or speed charging, etc. And all these overcharging, discharging, high operating temperatures while charging and discharging. The most important abusive usage is not limiting the battery pack. It's not that these are happening. These tend to happen. That is somehow which is linked to performance and need, something which is needed for a vehicle. But what is important is how and when are we going to stop these abuses, so that the battery pack is still operated at a good condition. There is no much harm being done on the battery pack. Getting it done once or twice is no problem, but continuously doing that is a problem. So that is the reason why it is important to understand and what is abuse and how many times and how do we stop it. So BMS, we know BMS is the sole reason how to stop doing that abusive conditions. So now, since we have understand what are those abusive usage conditions, what will it happen? It can lead to all the abusive conditions are to be designed that BMS will handle it, and if the BMS is not going to handle it, it could lead to a capacity degradation, life cycles would reduce, and internal short circuit happen, which would lead to increase in SEI layer formation, internal resistance, and then it could lead to explosions also. So this is what something has happened with the Tesla, Chevy, etc. It's not just a small OEM has happened. Even the biggest OEMs have failed because of this, because there are certain factors which are beyond limits. So that is something where a lot of observation has to be done, a lot of testing has to be done in the abusive usage conditions, and then arrive at right BMS capabilities. Since Tesla and Chevrolet and all, they have a huge field experience and they have already standardized the product, and that is being translated to nowadays, and on our technology we are already aware of it. But these people have witnessed that because they were not aware of that. So that is the reason why we are at a better off stage at this time, because we already know what will happen if that is not controlled properly. So these are some things which will be affected for the new entrants, but since we already know, we should not be committing the same mistake again. So the BMS has to be programmed accordingly, so that all the abusive usage conditions are well controlled and it doesn't have a very bad effect on the cell. So how do we set those BMS limits? Now here we see, now we have red windows, which is charging voltage and discharge cutoff voltage. So these are certain voltages which we program in the BMS. Then we have overcharge and over discharge and current C rates, which are responsible for the continuous C rate, continuous discharge rate, maximum C rate, maximum discharge rate. So depending on these C rate conditions, we program the BMS accordingly from the cell point of view. And then we also program the BMS from the cell operating point of view and the cell temperature operating. So the BMS is actually to be designed by considering the cell's safe operating limit. So if that is not taken into picture properly, the whole BMS designing is done something else. So that is something which has to be taken care while we design a BMS, which will lead overall pack's efficiency, better efficiency, and we are safeguarding the pack at a much more better way, because we know the cell better and we have to test the cell as much as possible, so that the BMS is programmed accordingly, and by doing that we would be making a better battery pack always. So that is what the BMS should do. So I think we have come to the end of the session. So I hope this session would have been very useful to you in all the ways, where in this week's course we have understood mostly the topics which are related to what are the different types of BMS, what are the architectures, what are its functionalities, what are the control parameters that the BMS do, and how do we identify the BMS operating voltages, and how do we have the cutoffs, and when we do the cutoff, what happens to the capacity, etc. And we also learned about the different types of cooling plates, what is its importance in the HV battery pack, what are the factors driving the thermal path of the cooling plate, and not just that, we also have understood what are the abusive conditions of the how the BMS tackles it, and what are the decentralized and centralized architectures, and how the low voltage and high voltage architectures are. We have covered a quite number of topics, and I hope this session would have been very useful to you. And by this we end the session, and thank you all for having me. I hope all these sessions have been of great use to you. Thank you so much.